To begin on this, we can see currently I'm using FLV video files, and each one of my video segments will be in its own separate file. It's easier to do this in this kind of project than to have one file with markers and then try to jump between those different markers. So if we are working in certain situations, it's better to have an interactive file where we actually put markers so then Flash can detect when we hit certain cue points within the video, and it can jump to those, or when we run into one of those cue points, it can then have an action occur. Now within the Flash file itself, I have used the FLV playback component. So we can see this is the playback component. Components are accessed in my components menu right here, which I could go window components, otherwise it's right there. And while we're doing video, and I'm using the FLV playback component. We're not using captioning as part of this kind of project that allows you to include captioning with it. Now, a few things about this. You will notice that I'm targeting Flash Player 9, not Flash Player 10 or Flash Player 10.2, but I'm only targeting Flash Player 9. The code that we're working with does not, and this component, do not function properly in Flash Player 10 or 10.2, so we have to downgrade to Flash Player 9. So if you create a new file and want to use the component, so if I have a new file and I go to components, and if I'm targeting 10.2, I have access to even a slightly newer version of the component, but this one works and I can just drag it out. There's my component on the stage. But I will want to then lower the publish level down to 9. Another bonus of that will work on anyone's desktop computer that hasn't fully upgraded their Flash player. By going back to 9, that means we're using an older version, so it will actually play on more machines. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. So this is what the component looks like. We can see we have our controls. I have my what will be my streaming indicator, time, volume, mute. These are the basic controls that we can modify over under component parameters. So that's over in my properties menu, component parameters here. As a default, it starts out where Flash has access to skins. And I can choose different skins which will have different buttons on them. For the demo project we're working with, I don't want to put controls for the user to be able to play, pause, or do anything. I just want the video to play. So at that point, I would choose none as a skin, so then it shows up with no skin. Otherwise, if I want to choose a skin off the list, so if I wanted to say over puts the controls on top of the video, if I say under with all, now we can see there's all the possible controls, and I can then choose coloring for different controls. So if I want it to be really obnoxious colored or something like that, I can put those kinds of controls onto my project. Now in this property window, I can also then choose the source of what the video is going to be. You should never ever set that up until you have saved a file. Otherwise, it's going to run into path issues. It doesn't know how to figure out the path of the video based on the path of the file, because the file, until you save, does not have a path. So then it's going to have a hard time actually reconciling where is that asset that I'm trying to load, because the video does not get added to the project. If I look in my library, I don't have any videos in here because my playback component is loading and playing external video files. That's how the whole system works. So I'm playing external video files. That's what the playback component does. I'm not embedding video into the timeline. That's a key distinction there. Now, when I look at the properties, I can play with more properties if I want. Autoplay is one that I may choose to pay attention to. May not, doesn't. This means that when this is on stage, if it has a source, when I hit that keyframe, it will automatically play. That's what that does. That's the autoplay. I can choose that on or off. It shows me I don't have cue points set up yet, so it knows that as part of it. So now going back to the demo file that we're working with. If I look here, I'll see that there's actually buttons that were on screen. I'm going to go through and I have more and more buttons throughout the project. So I have buttons here, text, text, and text. So what's going to happen is if I click on the Friends button, it's going to go to this frame here and it will play the Friends video. When the Friends video is done playing, it's going to jump to the Friends end frame where I have two buttons. One is Try Again, which will bring me back to the beginning, and the other one is going to be Give Up. If I go to Give Up, it's going to then jump to my Give Up frame, and the project ends at that point. If I initially choose Mary, it goes and plays Mary. It's going to then, at the end of the video, jump to Mary End, and then I have a choice of choosing Honeymoon or Runaway. So if I go to Honeymoon, I get that. If I go to Runaway, I get that. So that's the logic of what's going to occur with this particular file that you have downloaded. Now the video player covers the whole stage. If you notice, it's available the whole time. Through ActionScript, through code, we are going to tell the video player to become visible or to become invisible depending on whether we need to see it or not at particular frames. The reason for doing that is that allows us to have a more simplified version of code. So I put the video playback component on the stage. The video playback component has an instance name of Swift. Now of vid, V-I-D. I read the word Swift up here and was trying to say vid. Now, it's important while you're doing this, autoplay is not selected. And any of these attributes here, you can actually control all of those through code anyway, which is kind of nice. But so there's my playback component, instance name of vid. I can now turn it off so I can't see it. Now I can just build the rest of my project. Just like in Icebreaker where we build the rest of the project. So you can have animation, you can have all kinds of other things happen. It's just a matter of putting them in where you need it. So at this point, this is my Friends button. This is my Mary button. And you will notice in the timeline there's little flags and words are showing up there. Those are called labels. Those are frame labels. If I click on a keyframe, I can give it a label in the Properties window. So if I go to a keyframe, I can give it a label if I want to. So I made a layer just to hold all of my labels. The reason for doing that and using labels versus frame numbers is, one, it's easier to kind of code. Two, if in your code it says go to and play 23. 23 is kind of a meaningless number, but if it said go to and play Mary, and you know that you have a label named Mary, you don't even care what the number is, you know that that's where you want it to go to. So it makes more sense to use labels while you're working on a project when possible, because your code becomes infinitely more readable, because numbers become, as the project grows, they're meaningless. But labels start to mean something. So you click on a keyframe, you add in a label. So when I built this, I added all my keyframes, added all my labels, then I added my buttons, gave all my buttons instance names, and I gave them instance names of _BTN, short for button. So then again, when I look at the code, I know what kind of thing I'm referring to. It makes it a little bit easier down the road. Because at 3 in the morning while you're jamming on a project and you're starting to have issues of clarity in your thinking, which happens to all of us at 3 in the morning typically, it's nice to have done some of these steps to keep your project a little bit more organized. So to make this whole project happen, and just pull this up here. Oh, I have more room. No, do not auto recover. I hate that feature. Okay. Now, if you decide you're going to use this kind of method in your project, I would recommend you copy paste all the code from this into your project and then start changing the particulars versus retyping from scratch. It's easier that way. Now, vid is the instance name of my playback component. Now, I can give it a starting source or not, doesn't really matter. Doesn't matter what my property panel said. I said vid autoplay equals false. False means no. So autoplay, no. Visible, no. By saying false here. So I say vid.visible equals false. That means it becomes invisible. Now I tell the main movie to stop here. So when this goes, it stops. Now what I have not done is I did not click on a button, go to snippets and say add the snippet so then it references the instance name of the button. Because one thing that I could do is I could have a whole bunch of listeners and a whole bunch of functions, and it's really long code. There's a programming construct called a switch statement, which is a shorthand way of writing an if statement. So if I say, if this condition, do this, blah, 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 blah. Else, if this other condition, do this, blah, 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 blah. Else, if this other condition, do this, blah, blah, blah. And every time I have to use all these curly braces, I have to use the if, else, if, and it's just a lot of, I would argue, extra typing. The switch is a more compact way of writing it. It's a common technique that's used in most programming languages. So if statements are conditionals, if something, then do something else. The switch is a compact shorthand way of writing it that I think makes it a little bit more organized, and we'll take a look at that. So I'm telling my stage, listen for a click. And when I hear a click, call click handler. Here's my function click handler. Now, what this says here is if what I clicked on is not the stage, then, because otherwise if I don't have that, I get some not kind of breaking my program error messages, but I get some error messages I don't like. So it's easier just to say if what I clicked on, e.target, the target of what I clicked on, is not equal to the stage. Exclamation mark equal sign is the same as saying not. So in programming languages, the exclamation sign is usually going to stand for not. So that's how we would say not equal to. So if it's not equal to the stage, then I'm looking at the name of the thing I clicked on. Name being its instance name. So as you saw before, I had a button with an instance name of friends button. I have a button with the name of Mary button. Try again button, give up button, honeymoon button, and runaway button. If I click on the friends button, the trace statements here are so that when this runs, it just sends me a little message and says, hey, you clicked on this, you clicked on this, and just so I know that what I'm clicking on is what I think I'm clicking on, so it's a nice way of kind of tracking my program. Trace statements don't show up in a finished published thing, so when you run it in a web browser, anytime you put a trace statement, it doesn't show up. So it's kind of, it like gives you information as a developer so that you get feedback from your project. That's what trace statements are good at. If you don't want to write them, or if you don't need them, you can delete them and there will be no harm in your output. Most people find while they're working with projects, they put in large amounts of trace statements to get their project working, and then eventually they comment them out. So when you don't need it anymore, you put 2 slashes in front of it, and that's a comment, and it goes away. but we'll leave it for now. So this says vid visible true. Vid load, and now it loads the video file I want it to load. Vid seek 0, that rewinds the video. And then I tell the video to play, and I tell the timeline to go to and stop. Instead of a number, I'm sending it to a frame label. So I send it to friends. So hopefully you'll see how this makes it more readable. Instead of using numbers, using labels, then your code becomes a little bit more readable. Now, this says if the button I clicked on was the Mary button, traces out Mary, makes the video become visible, sends me to the, or loads Marry Me, rewinds it, tells it to play, and sends the playback head to the frame label Mary. Then my try again button says go to and stop start, so it sends me back to the beginning. My give up sends me to give up. Honeymoon to honeymoon. So as you can see, hopefully this becomes a little bit more readable kind of code.
What's up with the breaks?
Now the break is a necessary part of the syntax for a switch statement. So what we do is we say case, and the thing that if this is what made this true, so if this is what I clicked on, so we say case, the item, then we do a colon, all the stuff we want to have happen, and then break. Because otherwise what happens is if this case is true and I don't say break anywhere, it will go through and it will execute this code only. Not the other stuff, only your final code. So the break says stop going through my switch statement because that, this was true. This is what I wanted to have happen. Break says get out of here. Otherwise it will keep going through and it will execute the final stuff even though that one wasn't true. It's really kind of bizarre that way. But that's how breaks or switch statements work. And you'll find this works in processing, JavaScript, and other. And it's a switch statement is a more compact way of writing a if-else-if statement. And if you have an if-else-if statement that gets to be about 10, 20 else-ifs long, you'll realize how much cleaner this is to look at in finished code. Because it's just the items you're looking for. Now, in addition to that, I'm telling my video to listen for when it's done. So what we can do is we can tell the video, oh hey, when you are done, how about you go do something? Because otherwise it just ends on a black frame. I mean, the video ends and then we're stuck there. So we can see that if I comment that out, run this, if I hit friends, it now plays the video.
Hey, hi, I'm back. We're friends, right? Right?
And now the video stopped, and there's nothing going on. But Flash can detect. It can listen for that event of the video ending. And when the video is complete, we want this function to run. Let me get my timeline back here real quick. And then it says when the current label, so if the current label is friends, it makes the video become invisible. And then it tells the playback head to go to the frame label friends end. So then it moves over to friends end. If I happen to be playing the Mary video, it makes, again, the video become invisible. And then it sends me to Mary end, which is right here. If you had 10 videos, then you would have 10 cases. And if you had 50 buttons, you have 50 cases in your click handler function. But I would argue this is a much easier bit of code versus having a mouse event click listener for every button and a function for every button, and each of those occurring on the frames where those buttons are in your project. And then when you go to troubleshoot it and to change things and adjust things, it becomes a nightmare to find the code, because you're like, crap, which one do I need and where is it? And you think you're on the right one, but you're not. If you can get all of your code to be in this first frame, it makes your life much easier. This is also kind of setting you up for more and more advanced kinds of projects. As you work on projects, we can make an analogy to using CSS, cascading style sheets. Before CSS, we used to put formatting information for the web page directly in the HTML code. And that was fine and dandy until CSS emerged, and it's like, wow, this can make my life much easier. I can just put all my formatting information in the head of my document. That's great. And then, even better than that, I could put all my formatting information in an external CSS document. And then other things can just link to that. And suddenly, at that point, you experience the true power of separating logic from content, presentation from content. Here, by putting all of the code in the first frame, it's much easier to find and manage the code. As projects grow and become more complex, you actually put all of your code in an external ActionScript file. You might even have multiple external ActionScript files that you're linking to. Each one is a separate class that's encapsulating a particular piece of logic for your project. The advantage of doing so is you've now separated content from functionality, and it makes it infinitely easier to maintain. It also works better in a team-based environment, because now you can have your designers working on your artwork assets, and you can have your developers working on the interactive aspect, and it creates a much better workflow.